Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. I've lived in Orange all of my life. I love Orange. And I'd like to share some of my wonderful, happy memories of the town. I'm 75, so things were a lot different on the Boston Post Road where I grew up. Our house is still there. It was built in 1936, and it's probably the last house on the Boston Post Road, otherwise known as Milford Turnpike. It's probably the last house on the Post Road still standing. My great-grandfather's father came here as a 23-year-old with his wife from Derbyshire, England, in 1880. He bought 4 acres on the Boston Post Road. He was a blacksmith. Shortly after arriving here, he enlisted in the Connecticut Volunteers to fight in the Civil War, along with a lot of other young men from this town. Years later, he had a son, Samuel Ames Shaw, who also became a blacksmith. They worked together at a blacksmith shop on Orange Center Road, renting property from the Woodruff family. After that, Great-Grandpa had his own business on the Boston Post Road, number 150. There's a tool company there now. I think there's a Wendy's or another fast food place. And they had the property almost up to the subway, where the old Nicoletti's store was, which was very, very, very famous for their delicious hoagies. The Post Road was so different then. We used to have to walk up to Cacavalli's store. That's where the Ben's service station is now. We would walk up there to get the bus, where my cousins and I used to wait on a giant rock that was in front of the Cacavalli store. And then if we had 7 cents after school, before we walked back home, we could go in and see Mrs. Cacavalli and get a little Twinkie or Snowball or Hostess cupcake. And there were 2 in the package then for 7 cents. Now, some of my happiest memories are sitting at the kitchen table at Great-Grandma's house. They had 4 daughters. And just listening to the old stories. Great-Grandma used to go down where on Indian River Road, where the Buckles had a farm. The older people were Otto and Anna Buckles, and she used to make sauerkraut with Mrs. Buckles every year. Now, one of the Buckles girls became a Winkle, which that's another whole history, another whole story of the town. Let me just look at my notes here. I want to be very accurate. The carnival, that was always marvelous. It was held on the green, and a lot of the older folks, there was one ride at the carnival at that time. It was the Ferris wheel, and a lot of people would bring a folding chair and sit by the bottom of the Ferris wheel. The prizes at the early carnivals were 5 pounds of sugar, a carton of cigarettes, or an Indian blanket. And those were fun times because we'd all meet on the green and have a really good time. I have another memory of Racebrook Road where there was a farm equipment store, and that was run by the Hall family, and my Aunt Beatrice was a bookkeeper there, and it was reputed that it was because she had the most beautiful handwriting. And that's a good memory. I'm also thinking of the Boston Post Road. It was primarily a trucker route. Had a lot of diners and gas stations and service centers. And we used to sit on our porch and watch all of the buses going by on their way to Savin Rock, which was really a very big tourist destination. And it was a wonderful treat when we all had the last day of school. Most of the elementary school kids in Orange always went to Savin Rock to celebrate. That was a wonderful, wonderful time. One of the projects that great-grandpa and his father worked on was the ironwork for the parish hall of the original Church of the Good Shepherd on New Haven Avenue and Spring Street. We had a long history of going there, and I'd love at another time to share some wonderful photographs of a picnic that was held there in 1916, and some of the older townspeople are in that photograph, along with my great-grandma, who's holding my grandmother as an infant.
We'll definitely do that.
Yes, yeah. Another wonderful memory I have of the old Boston Post Road is that it would be a very common sight for great-grandma to have a stranger at the table. And we were kids, we'd come in, and she'd say, well, they needed a meal. It was very, very common because you had truckers, but you had a lot of walkers. I don't know where they were going or what they were doing, but great-grandma pretty much often had a stranger at the table. And she'd say, well, they needed a meal, they needed a sandwich. And then after she gave them a wonderful refreshment, they go out to the well, which we still used as kids, and pumped some really wonderful, nice, cold, fresh water. So that's another memory I have of the old Boston Post Road. And now next door to us was a very big farm owned by the Mango family. That was off to our left. And there was such a wonderful feeling of helpfulness and comradeship and just wonderful feelings of volunteerism, because Rosie Mango was a widow, and when her tomatoes were ripe and everything was ready to be picked, all of the neighbors would go down and help. It was very common years ago, if someone needed help, that the neighbors would find out and all volunteer, and then maybe have an iced tea later or a sandwich or something. And that was the same thing that would happen when it was haying time. You'd hear someone, it was haying time, so everyone would go and help do that.
Exactly.
Yes, yes. Very close-knit, very wonderful, a very more innocent time. Now, a friend of mine recalls how he used to walk up and down Orange Center Road hoping to find a glass bottle where you could get a 2-cent deposit and then go down to Cadwell's and have an ice cream soda. People don't realize that we did have our own soda fountain in town. And I'm remembering when the first library was in the Firelight Shopping Center. And volunteers helped bring a bunch of books, which probably were donated, and set up a little library over there. So these were glorious times. I've heard that the history of Orange is like a puzzle, that if you start talking and then talk to another person or a neighbor, or a family that's been here for many years, they put another piece in this marvelous puzzle, and also it provokes a wonderful new memory of life when we were young. And so that's it.
Well, Susan, can you tell us too some of the things that you're still involved in town? Because I know you're around town doing lots.
Yes.
So some of the activities that you do, if you can share with us.
Yes. Well, I like to volunteer at the senior center every day. I find that there's always something to do, and I do teach a senior art class here once a month on Monday, and then the past couple of months I've been doing a little after-school program with the Park and Rec in the Lions Club, which I enjoy very, very much. And I just find that days at the senior center are tremendously rewarding, because many times you'll meet someone who comes in that's just lost a family member or their spouse, and they're looking for taking the first step to come over here is difficult, but if you say hi and tell them your name, come on in, sit down, you'll meet a lot of friends here. And even if they go on a bus trip, they'll say, well, but I'm going alone. But when the trip is over, they've met maybe 25 new friends. And so it's a wonderful place to spend my spare hours and spread a little happiness and welcome people in town. They really need it.
Which is great. And you still do the Fireman's Carnival, we were talking
Oh,
about that.
yes, the Fireman's Carnival, very, very near and dear to my heart. I like to work every day from beginning to end. It's a wonderful time of volunteerism, brotherhood, sisterhood. It's just the adrenaline flows when we're making that food and serving people, and when it's over, you're tired, but you can't wait until the next year when you're going to do it all again.